YouTube channel. My name is Faith Jojo and I'm the creative director of House of Jojolet. So today we're going to be making the Tara bikini skirt. This pattern has been asked for severally and I finally decided to do something about it. So I hope you understand it, because I'm going to try as much as possible as I can to explain to the best of my capacity. So yes, and please take note when you're making this pattern, this video is not a beginners friendly video. Please ensure you know how to make a Solomon's knot and ensure you know how to make a puff stitch before you proceed with this video, because like I said, it is not beginners friendly. Thank you very much. Let's dive into the video. We're going to be chaining 114 chains. The reason why we're going to be counting our chains and not taking a direct measurement is because this pattern is a calculative pattern. It's not, it has to do with calculations. (13 and 14). So when you make your chain of 114, you're going to be reattaching your yarn to the very beginning, like to the first chain you made here. You attach your yarn into this first chain here, and then you're going to be making a slip knot. Please, when you're reattaching your yarn, make sure you don't make a mistake and you don't twist your yarn rather. After reattaching your yarn, you're going to be chaining 3, and this 3 counts as a double crochet. You're going to be chaining 3 and it counts as a double crochet. After your chain 3, you're going to chain 2 extra chains, 1, 2. This 2 extra chain counts as a chain space. So after you have your 5 chains in total, where 3 chains counts as a double crochet and 2 chains counts as 2 chain space, you're going to be preparing for a double crochet. From where you reattach your yarn, you're going to be skipping 2 chains, 1. So I'm going to be skipping 1 and 2, and I'm going to be making a double crochet in the 3rd chain. I'm going to repeat that just in case you didn't get it. Chain 2, 1, 2. Prepare for a double crochet. Count, skip 2, 1, 2, and in the 3rd chain, make a double crochet. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Chain 2, prepare for a double crochet, skip 2, 1, 2, and on the 3rd chain, make a double crochet. So we're going to be doing this all the way down, and when we get back here, I'll meet you when I get back here. So now we are at the last 2 chains. We're going to be chaining 2, 1, 2, and instead of preparing for a double crochet, we're going to be counting 3. The first 3 chains that we did that counted as a double crochet, 1, 2, and 3. Insert your hook into the 3rd stitch and make a slip knot to join. So here we have it. Please ensure that you count your chain 2 spaces and make sure it is 38 in number. We're going to be counting the chain 2 spaces, making sure it is 38 in number. When you've done that, we can continue the video. So I just counted mine, and yes, it is 38 in number. So the next thing we're going to be doing is from this slip knot, we're going to be chaining 2. We're going to be making a puff stitch into this first chain 2 space. To make a puff stitch, I'm just going to briefly explain. You wrap your yarn around your hook, you insert into this chain space, pull up your loop, wrap your yarn around your hook, insert into the chain 2 space, pull up another loop, wrap your yarn around your hook, insert into the chain 2 space, pull up another loop. To close up, we're going to be chaining all through, and we're going to close up with a chain 1. Going to be chaining another one, making another puff stitch into the chain 2 space. So wrap your yarn around your hook, insert into the space, pull up a loop, insert into the space, pull up a loop, insert into the space and pull up a loop. Close up with 1 chain and then chain another. Into this next chain 2 space, we're going to be making another puff stitch. Pull through everything at once, chain 1 to tighten and then chain another one. Make another puff stitch into the same space. Chain 1 to tighten, chain another one. So now we made 2 puff stitches directly beside one and the other. For this next puff stitch, you're not going to be making it here. We're going to be skipping this chain 2 space and making the next puff stitch into this chain 2 space. So now you're going to skip 1 chain 2 space and make your next puff stitch into the next chain 2 space. After that, you chain 1 and then skip the next chain 2 space. Make another puff stitch into the second chain 2 space from your hook. So we're going to be repeating this pattern for row 2. Make a puff stitch in this chain 2 space, skip a chain 2 space, make a puff stitch in the next chain 2 space, skip 1, make 1 puff stitch. And we're going to be doing that until we have 11 puff stitches on this waistband. So we're going to make sure we have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 till you get to the 11th. Then I'll show you what to do. So here is my 11th puff stitch on this waistband, and instead of skipping 1 chain 2 space, I'm going to just directly chain 1 and place a puff stitch in the next chain 2 space. This is my 11th puff stitch, and I said instead of skipping 1 for the 12th puff stitch, you're going to make another puff stitch directly in the chain 2 space beside your 11th puff stitch. I don't know if that's clear enough, but I'll say it one more time. After your 11th puff stitch on the waistband, don't skip 1 chain 2 space, make a puff stitch directly in the next chain 2 space. So for the 13th puff stitch, we're going to continue how we've been doing. We're going to skip 1 and make a puff stitch in this next pattern, in this next stitch, in this next chain space. This is the 11th. I didn't skip any for the 12th, and then for the 13th I skipped 1 space. So we're going to be continuing with the We're going to be continuing with the puff stitch, skip one, puff stitch. We're going to be continuing with this particular pattern for row 2 until you get to this very end, and I'll meet you there. So now I've gotten to my last puff stitch. I'm going to be chaining one to tighten and chaining one extra. I'm going to be joining this puff stitch to this puff stitch by coming to the top of the puff stitch here, just right here, and making a slip knot. So I'm going to be making another slip knot into this space here, and chaining up 2. So for row 3, this is how the pattern is going to be like. Make a puff stitch into this space, chain 1 to tighten, chain 1, make another puff stitch, chain 1 to tighten, make another puff stitch, chain 1 to tighten, chain another one, make a final puff stitch, chain 1 to tighten. The reason why I made 2 puff stitches is because in row 2 we made these 2 puff stitches directly beside each other. So for the next thing to do, we're going to be making a Solomon's knot. Please, this is not a beginners friendly video. If you do not know how to make a Solomon's knot, I advise you watch a video that will teach you how to make it before you continue. So we're going to be making a Solomon's knot. We're going to be attaching this Solomon's knot in between the puff stitch here with a single crochet. Make another Solomon's knot and another one again. Attach in between the puff stitch with a single crochet. Make one more Solomon's knot. Instead of attaching with a single crochet, this time we're going to be attaching with a puff stitch. So just for clarification, for row 3, I made a puff stitch, I chained one, and I made another puff stitch. And then I made a Solomon's knot, and I joined it with a single crochet. I proceeded to make 2 Solomon's knots and joined it again with a single crochet to this puff stitch. And then lastly, I made a Solomon's knot and joined it with a puff stitch. I'm going to be doing that again just so you understand better. Make a Solomon's knot, join it to this next puff stitch with a single crochet, make 2 Solomon's knots, join it to the next puff stitch with a single crochet, make one last Solomon's knot, join it to this next one with a puff stitch. One last time, I'm going to be repeating myself. Make a Solomon's knot, join it to the next puff stitch with a single crochet, make two more Solomon's knots, join it to the next puff stitch with a single crochet, make one more Solomon's knot, join it to the next puff stitch with a puff stitch. So for our next stitch, we're going to be making a puff stitch directly into this puff stitch, and that's because we didn't skip any chain 2 space before making the next puff stitch. So now for the next pattern, for the next stitch, we're going to be making we're going to be chaining 1, making a puff stitch into the next puff stitch. Make sure it's the puff stitch that is directly beside one another that you are doing this for. Make a Solomon's knot, join into this puff stitch with a single crochet, make 2 Solomon's knots, join into this next puff stitch with a single crochet, make 1 more Solomon's knot, join into this next puff with a puff stitch, chain 1 to tighten, chain another 1, and you're going to be repeating this pattern till you get to the end of row 3, and I'll meet you there. So now we're at the end of the row 3. I've made 1 Solomon's knot, I've joined it with a single crochet, I've made 2 Solomon knots, I've joined it with a single crochet, and now I'm making the last Solomon's knot, and I'm going to be joining it with a slip knot to the very beginning of our row 3. So for row 4, we're going to be inserting our hook to the space on our puff stitch and making a slip knot, chain 2, make a puff stitch, after we've made the first 2 puff stitch, we're going to be making a Solomon's knot. So this time it's not going to be the same thing as how row 3 was. This time we're going to be making 2 Solomon's knots, and we're going to be joining it on the previous Solomon's knot, the previous 2 Solomon's knots we made. And we're going to be using a single crochet. Make 2 Solomon's knots once more. And now we're going to be joining it with a puff stitch on the puff stitch. I'm going to be repeating what I just said. Make 2 Solomon's knots, Please ensure that you don't make the stitch here too tight, just so that you'll be able to insert it. You'll be able to fix your pin later on. So now we're going to be fixing our pin on the previous 2 Solomon's knots we did earlier, and we're going to be joining with a single crochet. Make 2 more Solomon's knots, and then join on the puff stitch with a puff stitch. I'm going to repeat myself one more time for clarity. Make 2 Solomon's knots, don't forget that you need to know how to make a Solomon's knot before watching this video. Thank you. You're going to be fixing your pin into the previous 2 Solomon's knots you made earlier and joining it with a single crochet. Make 2 more Solomon's knots, and join with a puff stitch. Don't forget that anytime you get to the place where you made 2 puff stitch directly beside each other, you're going to have to continue with 2 puff stitches beside each other. So instead of making Solomon's knot, Solomon's pattern around here, we're just going to keep on going down with 2 puff stitches directly beside the other. So you're going to continue with this pattern of 2 Solomon's knots, joining in with a single crochet on the previous Solomon's knot, on the previous 2 Solomon's knots, and then 2 more Solomon's knots, and then a puff stitch. So I'm going to continue to use that pattern for the entire row 4, and I will join you when we get to the beginning of the 4th row. So now we have our 2 last Solomon's knots, and we're going to be joining at the top of our first puff stitch. We're going to be joining it with a slip stitch. For row 5, we're going to be making a slip stitch in between our puff stitches, chain up 2, make a puff stitch, don't forget that anytime you come across the 2 puff stitches facing directly beside one another, you have to insert your 2 puff stitches into them. So now for row 5, we're going to be making 1 Solomon's knot. It's basically the same as row 3, but I just want to show, because this time around we're not working with the puff stitches, we're working with Solomon's knot. After you make your 1 Solomon knot, go directly into this into the middle of the 2 Solomon's knots you did previously, and join with a single crochet. Make 2 Solomon's knots, skip the joining that you did previously and go into the next 2 Solomon's knots and join with a single crochet. Make another Solomon's knot, join into the puff stitch with a puff stitch. I'm going to be repeating that just for the sake of clarity. Make 1 Solomon's knot, join into the middle of the 2 Solomon's knots you did earlier with a single crochet. Make 2 Solomon's knots, join into the middle of this Solomon's knot using a single crochet. Don't forget that you're skipping the middle, and then make 1 more Solomon's knot and join into the puff stitch with a puff stitch. This is basically what you're going to be doing. This is basically what you're going to be doing throughout the row. Don't forget that when you get to this point, you have to make 2 puff stitches directly beside the other. But then for the rest of the row, you're going to keep repeating this pattern over and over again. You can make this pattern. You can make this pattern over and over again until you get to whatever length you have. But as for me, I'm going to stop with the circling, with the going round and round. I'm going to stop when I have up to 10 of these puff stitches. So this is 1 2 3 4. I have 4 now. When I get to the 10th, I'm going to meet you back and we'll continue this video. So now I've gotten to my 10th puff stitch row. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. I'm going to be joining my last Solomon stitch to this puff row using a slip stitch. So now that we are done, we're making 10 rows. Apparently you can make any amount of rows you like. For me, I just like 10 rows before the slit starts. This is what I mean. So this is the slit. This is where the slit comes in the Tara skirt. So me, I like to have 10 rows, and this 10 rows is almost, for a size 8, is like directly before the hip. So if you want to make yours longer, you can make that. If you want your slit to be shorter, you can do that, whatever you like. But for me, I like to make it 10 rows before I begin my slit. So to begin my 10th row, I would slip stitch in the middle of this puff stitch and slip stitch in between the 2 puff stitches. I'm going to do that again just so you see it. In the middle of this puff stitch, I would slip stitch, and in between the 2 puff stitches, I would make another slip stitch, chain up 2, and turn my work. Now this is the point where we're going to be working in rows and not more in rounds. Before we're going round, but now we're just going to be working in rows. So after turning my work, I'm going to make a puff stitch in the middle of this puff stitch, just like before. The reason why we are turning our work is so that there'd be a split in between. So instead of going round, we're going to be working from row to row to row. Going to continue the same pattern. So since my last pattern was a 1 2 1, now I'm going to be working with a 2 2. So I'm going to do 2 Solomon knots, insert my hook into the middle of the previous, make 2 more Solomon knots, attach with a puff stitch in the puff stitch. I'm going to continue to do that until I get to the end, until I get to where the 2 puff stitches that are placed directly beside the other, until I get there. So I'm going to continue to do this until I get there. So now we've gotten to the 2 puff stitch that are directly beside the other. I'm just going to be making 1 puff stitch here, chain 1 to tighten, and chain 1 more, make another puff stitch and chain 1. So like I said, we're no longer working in rounds, we're working in rows. So I'm going to be turning my work. Instead of continuing here, I'm just going to turn my work and place a slip stitch in between the hole, chain 2, and continue like how I have always been doing. So now I'm going to be using the pattern 3. I'm going to be using the pattern 1 2 1, since the last row was 2 2. So now you can keep making this you can keep making this slit length, you can keep making it over and over. You'll be going row by row by row by row, and you can stop at any length you want. That's totally your choice. But me, I usually stop when I have 30 in total, 30 puff stitches by the side in total. So you can stop anywhere you like, that's okay. And when you're done with one side, when you're done with one panel, you definitely have to reattach your yarn and continue with the second panel. I hope this video is understandable. I'm not going to be finishing up because I just made this video for you to know how this skirt pattern is done, and I hope the explanation is quite good enough for you. So yes, this is how to make the Tara bikini cover-up skirt. I'm going to be showing you how to make the dress much later. You can pair this with any bikini you like, any type of bikini you want to pair it with. It's totally up to you. And yes, please don't forget to cut all the loose ends when you're done, so that you have a very neat end result at the end of the day. Thank you for watching. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm going to put my IG handle in my description box. Thank you for watching. Bye.